Hey, this is Bill Bell from San Francisco, California, and you're listening to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast.
Welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring the applied philosophy of traditional Stoicism. The College of Stoic Philosophers is an online school founded in 2008. We at the college endeavor to educate all who would be Stoics and Stoic philosophers who aspire to the good life within the world community. Podcast episodes will include discussions of Stoic history, application, interviews, and much more, all while having some fun, fate permitting. I'm your host, Mark Sterry. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Dr. Bill Bell, welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. How's it going today there, Bill?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. This is going to be exciting.
So Bill has been a friend of mine, student at the College of Stoic Philosophers for, when I first met you, Bill, a number of years ago, I was your mentor for physics and Prosoche, I believe.
Right.
What else have we done?
I did one of your courses on
Heraclitus, and it's called
Heraclitus.
On Heraclitus.
Yes, I did your Heraclitus class. Yeah.
So Bill is one of the most smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. He's a psychotherapist out of San Francisco, California. And to help me with this episode, my other dear buddy, Don Putnam, who's a previous podcast guest. Don, how are you doing today there, brother?
Doing really good. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Good to be with you again.
Yes, you too as well. So, Bill, what's the weather like out there in San Francisco this week?
A little cloudy right now, but not too cold. It's about maybe 65 right now. Yesterday was sunny. I think we're doing a hell of a lot better than the rest of the country.
It sounds like it. Don, are you at 200 degrees down there yet, or what?
No, it's really nice 65 degrees and sunshine. We're enjoying spring here in Houston.
Wow. Well, we've had 20 below zero, 15 below zero here in St. Paul, Minnesota for the last week or so, and then it broke yesterday. It's now in the 40s. And so why this podcast came in really quick for me is because I was with my dogs outside to wear them out, and they came in completely covered in mud. Mud everywhere. A good opportunity for me to practice my Stoic practice, staying calm. But we love the weather, but it's a little icky here, but it's all good. We wanted to have Bill on the show for a while, and Bill is would you consider yourself a traditional Stoic, or else you're a psychotherapist that has an interest in Stoicism and even incorporates that into your practice, right?
Right. I'm primarily a cognitive behavioral therapist, and when I was speaking with my webmaster about adding a page about Stoicism, they did some research and they said, you know what, people really don't search for that kind of stuff. And I said, well, I want it on there anyway because it's an offering that I have, and I think a lot of people can benefit from it. So they made the page, and I probably get 2 or 3 emails a week for people specifically looking for some integration of Stoicism with their therapeutic practice. So yeah, it worked out pretty well.
How did you come across Stoicism in the first place?
Well, it was a couple of years ago. It was probably prior to COVID. I'm an avid reader of nonfiction. I've done that for quite a while. And I do a lot of research for my clients, and I review a lot of books that run the gamut of psychology. It ranges from self-help books to psychology and psychotherapy, but more specifically, and recently, evolutionary biology, neuropsychology. But like I said, prior to COVID, I started getting into a lot of philosophy and mythology, particularly Greek mythology, and we'll get into that later. But interestingly, philosophy and mythology were really of no interest to me earlier in life, and I kind of had an aversion to those topics. Philosophy was the very last course I completed in my undergrad degree. And then one day, like many people have done, I think Don included, I came across Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and that's where my interest sort of exploded. And I remember after finishing the book, I said, I've always been a Stoic, I just didn't know it.
I think there's a lot of people like that as well. They kind of stumble across it and they go, hey, I've been living this stuff my whole life. And then they really make the connections. So speaking of that, what are the connections did you make between your psychotherapy practice and Stoicism? And then I know there's a lot of modalities out there, and you talk about cognitive behavioral therapy. What other modalities are you trained in and do you use in your practice?
Oh, okay. This is going to be a long-winded response to the question. It's a really good question, though, so I want to sort of make sure I cover it all. Began way back in the 90s. I was working on my graduate degree in counseling psychology, and the department chair told us that we kind of needed to choose a theoretical orientation because it would help us sort of, with a frame of reference for understanding human behavior, emotions, and thought processes. So I picked Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy, or we'll call it RET for short. But let me give you a quick lesson in psychology, or cognitive psychology for that matter. RET is what we call first generation cognitive therapy. It was a precursor to Aaron Beck's better known cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is second generation. And then we have these third generation cognitive therapies like dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. So I studied RET way before I was even licensed, and I have current certifications in both CBT and DBT. Long ago, I actually went to a lecture by Albert Ellis. This was probably back in 92 or so. And I chose RET for my theoretical orientation because I liked Albert's matter-of-fact, sort of rational style of writing. And he had this kind of comedic tempo to it, sort of like Bertrand Russell. He's another one of my favorite authors. And so one of the key components of RET is what Albert called the ABCDE model. And the acronym stands for, A is the activating event. Something happens and that triggers you to sort of form a value-based opinion on the matter. And then what follows that is B, the irrational belief system. Ellis identified 14 core irrational beliefs in the form of what the activating event means to you, or means about others, or means about the world. Now, CBT calls these maladaptive schemas, and they counted them as 15. So you can see the similarities between these two. So we got the A and the B, and then the C is the consequences, which is usually a mood state that leads to an impulse to action or inaction. And then the part of the RET therapy here is the disputation, or the challenge of that irrational belief with rational self-questioning. And then once you do that, you sort of formulate this new belief system. And that's the result of the disputation that results in behavioral change. So I found it, pretty simple and straightforward, and it's been empirically validated. Now, when I was studying, they were really pushing some other theories like psychodynamic theory and psychoanalysis, but those are not empirically validated. They're really subjective and they're difficult to test. To the layperson, it might be hard to tell the difference between RET and CBT, the first and second generation things, but RET is more confrontational and it's focused on changing and reducing emotional reactions by using rational disputation. CBT is more collaborative. And it's focused on the interplay between 5 different things: the thought, the mood, the behavior, your body sensations, and your environment, and how they're all connected. And the belief is that any positive change in one of these areas is going to have a positive effect on one or all of the other 4 areas. Now, lastly, DBT, the third generation, it's an even newer approach, and it focuses on 4 main goals, which are mindfulness, all heard that word, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. Now, most people equate mindfulness exercises with sort of like meditation, and it is essentially mindfulness-based meditation, which means being aware of the other 3 areas. Now, DBT, CBT, and RET, they all use very similar interventions, but each has also developed their own nuanced interventions. But let me get back to the client side of things. So after I have a new client, I get a general understanding of their capacity to learn, and I expose them to one or more aspects of some of these strategies, whether it be Stoicism or CBT or mythology or whatever. And I try to find out which ones they're most responsive to. And some enjoy the mythological approach, others are completely disinterested in that kind of stuff. Some, they've heard of the word Stoic, but they don't know what it means. So I give them a glimpse and see if they're interested in that. I try it out. And sometimes it works, and sometimes they want a more clinical intervention. So we go with either second or third generation approach. I find there's a big gender difference between these, where men predominantly are more driven towards the Stoic approach than women. And women tend to prefer a more feeling-based approach, such as DBT, because it has a heavier focus or emphasis on identifying feelings and processing feelings. But let me get back to Ellis for a second here. Now, little did I know at the time, because I had that aversion to seeing these links, but he was heavily influenced by Stoicism. Maybe I read about it back then, but I kind of brushed it off. And then after reading Meditations and a couple of other books, and I'm going to plug Donald Robertson here, his book, Philosophy of Cognitive Behavioral Therapies, Stoic Philosophy as a Rational and Cognitive Psychotherapy. These texts brought me back to Ellis. Robertson referenced Ellis quite a bit. And then I saw it. There was that link between Stoicism and psychotherapy. And even reading Ellis further, I noticed that he likes to quote Epictetus quite a bit. He quoted, "People are not disturbed by things, but by their opinions of them." Stoicism talks about the disciplines of assent, of desire, and of action, and it emphasizes that those are the only things over which we have control. Ellis in RET, he emphasizes that we're motivated by beliefs. Some are rational, some are irrational, and that causes us to feel certain emotions, and those emotions in turn cause us to act in certain ways. Now in CBT, we call that the thought, mood, behavior pathway. So do you see the similarities here? Assent is thought, desire is feeling, and action is behavior. Now in discourses, Epictetus urged his readers that you may commit no fault therein in giving and withholding assent of judgment, that you may not be deceived, which basically means be rational in your thought and not so moved by emotion that you get the facts wrong. Don't deceive yourself, because the consequence of that deception is irrational thought that leads to an emotional response, which in turn causes an action or inaction. This is the behavior. So having said all that, when I connected these dots 30 years later, Stoicism had a really strong pull on me. It always made sense to me theoretically, but what I learned this time around, and it was strategic, that maybe the more important lesson is learning the difference between what is good and what is bad, and perhaps more importantly, what's neither good nor bad, which makes up the preponderance of our experiences. Only then do you truly know what actually has value. Now, I know I'm long-winded here, but I want to take this a step further. I mentioned Greek mythology earlier, and I want to link that to Stoicism and psychotherapy. So the Greeks were polytheistic. They had many gods, hundreds of them. And interestingly, these gods were grand representations or personifications of human emotion, human behavior, human constructs, more often than not in really great detail. Now, in some cases, entire sets of siblings represented whole sets of human constructs. And in Greek mythology, just as in Christianity, man was made in the image of God or the gods. And I'll take Asclepius, for example. He's the son of Apollo, which is the god of healing. Now, Asclepius is the god of the healing aspects of the medical arts. And I use this example deliberately. His children are demigods. He had Hygeia, which is hygiene. He had Eagly, which was for good health. Podalirius was diagnostics. Mukayan was for surgery. Panacea was remedy. And Asiso was the process of curing. And lastly, Ieso was recuperation. And I try to represent the process of therapy through these demigods, that all of them are necessary for lasting recovery. I have to make a correct diagnosis in order to select the correct remedy, which is the treatment modality, to begin the process of curing, which is psychotherapy. And part of recuperation is teaching proper mental hygiene and remaining in good health. So all of these parts or siblings are required for successful health outcomes. If any part is left out, the entire process fails. Part of the therapist's responsibility, or part of this is the therapist's responsibility, and part of this is the client's responsibility. And I emphasize this at the outset. You don't just come in and get fixed. You have to participate in and out of the therapeutic hour to gain benefit. That's one example of linking mythology, Stoicism, and psychotherapy. Another example is the dichotomy of Apollo and Dionysus. And I use this one quite often. Apollo represents harmony, reason, discipline, and control, to name a few. And Dionysus represents irrationality, chaos, passion, or what we call emotion, intoxication, and revelry. Now, not to say he doesn't have desirable traits, which he does, such as creativity, liberation, spontaneity, and theater, the things that make us human and not robots. But the therapeutic value in representing this dichotomy is that we must exhibit both Apollonian as well as Dionysian traits to be human. Too much or too little creates an imbalance. And the same is true for other such complicated constructs, such as love, the goddess Aphrodite, jealousy, the goddess Hera, wisdom, the goddess Athena, and even Zeus, who's the god of gods. He represents the emotional complexity of leadership. And I translate that to the homunculus, or our inner voice of reason, our inner daimon, who is subject to the whims of all these other gods, and he has to exert dominion over them. This is the representation of responsibility and how complex it is to deal with our own shit in a world of chaos and not only survive, but flourish. You've heard of Prometheus. He represents forethought. His brother Epimetheus, he represents afterthought. Take Ate, for example, the goddess of ruin, often depicted as a force that leads gods and humans into rash actions and suffering. Ate acts on emotion without thought, sort of like Epimetheus. The world of Greek mythology is ripe with this wisdom. So you see, I can integrate the mythological with the philosophical, and when people can understand that the current third generation cognitive therapy has its roots in ancient philosophy, which has its roots in mythology, I think it gives great credit to both the new and the old.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
That is fascinating, Bill. Fascinating. So let's say I'm a client of yours, Bill, and I'm considering jumping in front of a train because I'm so upset about the final of the Yellowstone TV series. It's going to be done forever. And you I ask you, Bill, what to do, and you're dropping stuff like Daimon and Epictetus and Seneca and all these things. And let's say I don't have any connection to Stoicism at all. Does that still beneficial to me or your clients?
Oh, the ending of Yellowstone. I'm sorry, the question was, how do I link them to Stoicism if they've never been exposed to it?
Yeah, does it still help?
I mean, a lot of people come specifically for this offering. Like I said, other people have never heard of it. And they, Marcus Aurelius doesn't even click in their minds. I think even those with little or no exposure to it can benefit from it. I have these, I call it my wall art, but I have these images on my wall. It's a frame of, I think, 32 different Stoic references. And some people come in and they look at that and they're inquisitive, and some of them are like, can I take a picture of that? And I'm like, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out. They seem fascinated by it. And I'll give you some examples of things that I use that have Stoic references that aren't necessarily completely focused on Stoicism, but we'll take, let's start with the four cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. I mean, that's the basic primer for Stoicism. People ask me about that all the time. I have amor fati, or love of fate, which is often contrary to our desires or what we want. The big thing with DBT is equanimity, emotional regulation, or grace. That's another big Stoic trait. I have a reference of the choice of Hercules, and that's the choice between virtue and vice, or pleasure and honor. Memento mori, remember that you die. Live in today. It's similar to carpe diem, which is often misunderstood to mean live in a hedonistic way, but it actually suggests that we live each day as if it were our last, and more importantly, the one by which we will be judged. So it's not about taking everything you can when the ship is going down, you take everything you can, this is how you will be judged. So those are just a couple examples, and I think most people can relate to them even if they don't want to take a Stoic approach to therapy.
Very interesting.
So another question, I've thought a lot about this, and I'm really curious about what your take on it is. So as I've gone through my own philosophy degrees and studying all the different types of philosophy, Stoicism, I live a lot of my life through Stoicism, but I've come across the existentialist, and I've also understood that kind of this humanistic psychotherapy is also used very broadly. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that Stoicism will say, yeah, live according to nature. It kind of helps with equanimity and a lot of these other aspects that you've mentioned before. But the existentialists kind of come in and say, you know what, you need to derive your own meaning in life. You got to figure out what that meaning is. And the Stoics are kind of mum on that, other than to say live according to nature. But how much does the topic of value and meaning for your clients come into therapy, and how do you kind of guide them and walk them through that process?
This is actually one of my favorite parts of the entire therapeutic process, is guiding people down that existential pathway. So I tell relatively everyone about the Greek concept of eudaimonia, and that translates to flourishing and what that means. And I begin by asking people to define flourishing. I want an unprompted glimpse of what they value the most. And when I ask the question, most people focus on externals like, oh, I just want to eat great food or travel to exotic places or have all the toys or improve my looks, and they don't necessarily say this, but they actually do it, is they use people. And it's a sort of the world is my oyster mentality. But none of that really makes them good people. It might make them feel good, but they have a misunderstanding of what good is. So I try to refocus them on a definition of goodness, and that which comes from within. And then we focus on defining someone's ultimate purpose or meaning. Again, something a lot of people seem clueless about in their day-to-day actions. And if you judge someone by what they do day to day, you would find very little value in most of what they do. So here I pull in a non-Stoic philosopher, Aristotle, and he talked about final cause. And I use proximate and ultimate causes in therapy to explain this position. And when I look at final cause, I can't find the reference for this, but I use it all the time. And I memorized, when I read this, I memorized it because it had so much meaning for me. But purpose, when you think of eudaimonia, you think of flourishing, and flourishing is to what end? It's the purpose for which everything is done, but is not done itself for any other purpose. And when I say that, people are like, what? So I said, let me repeat this again. It's the purpose for which everything is done, but has not done itself for any other purpose. And when we apply that to ourselves, what is our ultimate cause? That opens this great existential dialogue. This non-Stoic training I attended many years ago sort of had a Stoic lesson built into it. And it was a training on relationships. And the message was, you can't make your wife love you more, but you can be a more loving husband. And that's something that you have control over. That's the goodness inside of you, not that narcissistic wanting of attention from another person, but the love that you exhibit towards another person. So I think that is sort of the basis of, what is your purpose? What is the existential crisis here that you want to sort of process and get through?
When you are working on Stoicism with your clients or interjecting Stoic ideas, do you keep it simply ethics based, or do you incorporate ideas like logic and physics?
Well, I think you can't pull them apart. I don't know that you could address just one without referencing the importance of the other two. So I think, one would think ethics is the primary portion related to therapy, but it's truly about all three of them. A huge part of understanding is what is in accord with nature. And that's something that most people have never even considered, what is according to nature. And that is everything that we don't have control over. And how a lack of understanding of what that is leads to significant emotional dysregulation. That's the physics part of it. Learning to desire only what's within your control and not be influenced by these emotions. And I prompt people, have you heard of the 7 deadly sins? And 100% of the time they say, oh yeah. And I take it a step further. The Christians had like 7 main categories, and they called these the gateway sins to the other vices. But the Greeks had 4 main groupings and a total of 32 vices last I counted. And they call these the passions. And so I have that's another part of my wall art. We go over that list, and the complementary virtues that counteract them. For example, you replace malice with benevolence, or anxiety with assuredness, or anger with kindness, or sloth with industriousness. Some people come to therapy wanting to change these things they can't control. We can't fix that, but we can change the way we think about it, meaning how we judge this or that, because oftentimes we judge something as bad when in fact it's indifferent, or more aptly a dispreferred indifferent. And once we learn to tolerate more and more dispreferred indifference, we start to improve in our perceptions of what's actually good and what's actually bad. And that's the logic part of it. And then we can change the way we feel about it, or our desires, and that's the physics part of it. You physically feel something and you want to have an internal reaction to this feeling or your belief. Ethics is about behavior towards or away from something. In other words, the inclination to act, the external reaction. So think about it this way. Logic, that's that internal thought. Physics, that's that internal reaction. And ethics is the external action. Link this to the CBT technique. We talked about the ABCDE before. So CBT shortened it, ABC. You have the activating event, something happens to you, that triggers a belief, it's a thought or judgment that you have about that event, and that triggers a consequence, which is a feeling, and that feeling in turn triggers an action. So you see how it's all an interplay, no matter whether you go with the Stoic approach or whether you go with one of the cognitive approaches.
That's interesting. And again, we talk about you can't really separate all three of those things when we start talking about Stoicism and everything, and seeing it in psychotherapy just seems to hold true. Beyond that, like what other specific areas do you help your clients in terms of like growth? Do you give advice to your clients, or is it kind of more of an evolution discussion with them? Did they kind of lead themselves down this path? How do you help them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I learned that very early on in my education. Was we don't give advice to clients. We guide them. I never tell somebody you should quit your job or you should end that relationship. What I try to do is be both sides of that equation for them. What are the pros? You do a cost benefit analysis? What are the pros for me staying in this relationship or job? What are the cons? And then have them make their own decision. They generally need direction. And I think where they need the most direction is in finding value. So I let them choose that the trajectory. Now, I'll quote an anthropologist by the name of Clifford Geertz, and he wrote that, we begin with this natural equipment to live 1,000 kinds of lives, but in the end, having lived only one. And I think a lot of adults still toy around with those 1,000 possibilities, and they're never satisfied with choosing one, and they end their lives in despair because they didn't really choose anything. They just existed without a trajectory, without a value system, without vision or destination, and they're just really angry people. And I think that explains why a lot of people have a lack of commitment in many areas of their lives. They've been believing that optionality is freedom, and it's actually a mental trap.
Wow.
That is fascinating. So, Bill, I got a text from you not long ago, and you are a new father to twins.
Yes.
How does practicing traditional Stoicism apply to your own life, including being a father of babies?
Oh, wow. Gosh. In two big ways, I suppose. The first is an impulse to action, and the second is, as I previously stated, living in accord with nature. So let me explain those two separately. You mentioned children. I could make I could make an analogy there for the kids as well as what I think most people can relate to, which is driving, because I used to be really impacted by other drivers. Like if they were careless, I'd be the guy to follow them. I'd honk at them, shoot the finger, yell at them, look at them crazy as I'm passing them, and it would bother me all day long. How could somebody be so rude to me, so careless? What were they doing? I just let it infect me. I'd let it infect my whole day. Sometimes I'd share it with people around me. It was just get in my nerves. But what I've effectively done, and I'll link my kids to this in a second. What I've effectively done is reduce that experience to literally like a quick reflex rather than an enduring state of being. And it usually ends very quickly with me laughing at myself. And that's laughing at the part of me that still has that reflective or reflexive reaction, that split-second reaction. And then I asked myself in that split second, why would I let this literal stranger hold so much influence over my entire being? Why give them that power? Because now I'm able to have that experience. I have that unconscious reflexive urge to react or want to react. That's a split second nobody can control. And then you have this conscious reassessment of it, and you apply reasonable judgment to it, and then you adjust your emotions accordingly, and you have an appropriate action, which is basically to ignore it and go about your day laughing at your old self or even having thought of reacting poorly. Now, you got a screaming kid in the room. Okay, what do you do with a screaming kid? And they scream all the time. My daughter, she had colic and it was just incessant. And what can you do? This is a being that I created. You know, I brought this stress upon myself. I created this being with colic, and she's screaming because her nervous system is developing, and she doesn't know what the hell is going on. She was in this comfortable womb, and now she's out in this world, and it's cold sometimes, and it's loud sometimes, and she doesn't understand what's going on, and so she's got this voice, and believe me, she's got this voice that is incessant, and when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're dealing with it and you can't get her to be quiet, and your automatic thought is, what am I going to do with this kid? And then you just have to hold her and just let her cry it out. And that might be an hour or two, and you just have to do it, and eventually it gets better. Thank God she's 14 weeks old now. And they say that it peaks at 12, and I believe that is a fairly accurate assessment, because it peaked about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and now we're kind of coming down off of that. And I'm just seeing this beautiful little girl develop, and it's just one of the most amazing things.
Wow.
Oh,
amazing.
I was going to answer the second part of that. Living in accord with nature. This is sort of an all-encompassing mantra. Nature is everything around us, even man-made stuff, not just plants in the earth, but social constructs that we live in. Take, for example, the economy. Do we have any control over that as individuals? No. But we do have some control over how much of that we want to involve ourselves in. You choose to use a credit card, you choose to buy a house, you choose to invest in stocks, you're taking the responsibility for that risk. And if the market doesn't go your way, or you spend more than you can pay off at the end of the month, and you have that 27% interest rate that kicks in, then you accept the consequences and don't complain about it. You live in a big city, you deal with big city problems. It comes with the territory. You accept the chaos that comes with the circumstance. There's no woe is me. That's life. If life throws you a bunch of lemons, and I hate using that analogy, but it works here, it's about accepting your lot in life as well as your choices, both the good and the bad.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Don, you got one more for him?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of thinking through your history with all your different clients, can you think of maybe a common or even a simple example where a client's having some difficulties or problems or challenges, and like what are some practical Stoic behavioral advice or technique that you've offered up for them to help themselves?
Let's see, Stoic advice. I like using the view from above, which is a mindfulness exercise. It's one where you sort of mentally observe your space. That could be your lot in life, and you zoom out. Sort of like the opposite of, when you go to Google Earth and you plug in an address, and it takes you from this satellite view down to this very, very shallow view. Think of the opposite of that, okay? So imagine that you begin 6 feet above your head, and then you're pulling back up to the satellite view. And then imagine how insignificant you are among all the goings on of the world. And you can experience a reversal of this sort of egoistic view, which is seeing yourself as the center of the world and everything revolving around you. Now, don't just consider that space, but consider the multiple planes involved here, the time, the multiple contexts of culture and society, of your age, of your abilities or disabilities. And then you're going to find that you're just one insignificant variable among so many planes of relevance and irrelevance. So I think that helps decenter people. I referenced it before, I'll reference it again, but that list of passions and the complementary virtues. Emotions are what make us human, and we should use those emotions to guide us towards virtue. So whenever a client can identify what they're feeling, whether it's anxiety, despondence, envy, or anger, they can envision the corrective course. It's complementary virtue, like assuredness, hope, gratitude, and kindness. Just ask yourself, if I'm feeling anxious and I should be feeling assuredness, what rational thoughts could guide me there, and what resulting action will take me there. Deciding what is right, that's the cardinal virtue of justice. Taking action is the cardinal virtue of courage. Applying the correct amount of action is the cardinal virtue of temperance. And having a correct understanding of the entire sequence and being able to synthesize the meaning of it all the meaning of it all being in accordance with nature is the cardinal virtue of wisdom. Let's see, lastly, maybe premeditatio malorum. And this might sound counterintuitive to a lot of people, but if you're anxious, the last thing you think you want to do is think of the worst case scenario. And sometimes that might be the best thing to think about. What's the most horrible thing that can happen? And if you really think about it, oftentimes it's really not that horrible at all. It might be inconvenient. It might be of no consequence. Just simply look at it as a dispreferred indifferent. These are reasonably harmless consequences. But what if the stakes are high, like losing a significant amount of money? You accept fate. You develop the courage to deal with it. You play a risky game, you deal with risky outcomes. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Accept the outcomes and agree that you voluntarily played the game, hopefully to the best of your abilities, hopefully relying on good decision making and not fate, which means avoiding gambles unless you can reasonably tolerate the losses. Again, reframe any outcome as a dispreferred indifferent. It's not a bad outcome. Let's talk about control, because I think a lot of people really get hung up on this one. And let's talk about it in the context of influence, because we never really have absolute control over anything except Stoic students, our assent, our desire, and our actions. We have influence or sway over things, and we can steer things with as much strength as we have towards a desired outcome. And I like to use analogies when we talk about influence, such as how effective is your rudder? How troubled are the waters? How sturdy is your ship? What position do you serve on that ship? How many other ships do you have that are supporting your mission? How true is your compass? Because a lot of people don't have a true compass. So these analogies, I think, help clients understand that external variables that affect their level of influence. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about logic a little bit here. Logic is forming an opinion about something. It's about reasoning. And I really can't emphasize this enough. To me, this is the entire basis of psychotherapy and of philosophy. Reason applies wisdom as well as purpose and meaning, bringing us back to eudaimonia, which is the purpose for which everything is done, but is not done itself for any other purpose. This is often devoid of self-inquiry. I reflect on the Delphic maxim, know thyself, which means know what your values are, know which God you worship. For many people, that might be Plutus, who's the god of wealth, or Tyche, the goddess of fortune and luck, for those who like to gamble, or Dionysus, the god of luxury. And for others, it might be Athena, who's the goddess of wisdom, Themis, who's the goddess of justice, and Ares, the god of courage. Those are three of the four cardinal virtues. Basically, you have a choice between good and bad, which is symbolic, the struggle, Hercules, of good and evil. This is the human condition. So in summary, I think the search for happiness has run a lot of people into a life of suffering, because happiness is a feeling, it's a fleeting experience. So we're always chasing it. But flourishing is a condition we create for ourselves. It's not a destination, it's a determined pursuit. We can find more happy experiences by a constant state of flourishing, which requires sustained, actionable effort in a meaningful direction. So I hope that meandering answered all of your questions.
Amazing response.
That blew my mind. That was fascinating, Bill. Bill, Don, you are two of my favorite people on planet Earth. Bill, if people want to learn more about you or your practice, what's your social media or website?
My website is drbillbell.com. That's drbillbell.com.
And Don, after listening to Bill for this last little while, you still want to go down this road?
Oh, I'm even more motivated. I was just thinking, I can't wait to listen to this podcast all over again. I'll probably put it on repeat for a whole week. It was just amazing, amazing wisdom, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing what you've shared today. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Please visit the collegeofstoicphilosophers.org for information on the college, e-journal, and course offerings. Till next time, pro cop time.